Sometimes the most important person you will ever meet is the stranger everyone else decides to walk past. The rain had settled over downtown Indianapolis like a gray blanket that refused to lift, turning every traffic light into a shimmering reflection across the soaked pavement. Most people hurried with their collars raised and their eyes fixed on somewhere warmer, somewhere safer, because cold autumn nights had a way of convincing busy people that compassion could always wait until tomorrow. Ethan Brooks tightened the zipper on his weather jacket as he stepped out of the 24-hour grocery store with a single paper bag tucked beneath one arm. Inside were a loaf of wheat bread, a gallon of milk, and Lily's favorite tomato soup, bought with careful calculations that every single parent understood without ever speaking aloud. His old pickup truck waited across the street, its headlights blinking once when he unlocked the door with a key fob held together by faded tape. He was halfway across the crosswalk when a burst of laughter echoed from the nearly empty bus stop ahead. A young woman sat alone on the metal bench, her elegant navy coat slipping from one shoulder as she struggled to stay awake. Her blonde hair clung to her face from the rain, and one expensive heel rested awkwardly on the wet sidewalk several feet away, as though she had forgotten it existed. Two passing pedestrians glanced toward her, exchanged uncomfortable looks, then continued walking without slowing down. A rideshare driver rolled down his window for a second, frowned, and drove away before she could even lift her head. Ethan stopped. He looked toward his truck, then back toward the woman. His tired blue eyes carried the familiar hesitation of a man who had learned the hard way that doing the right thing often came with unexpected consequences. Still, something about the loneliness surrounding that bench reminded him of another rainy night years ago, when kindness from a complete stranger had helped him survive the darkest chapter of his own life. He walked closer, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Ma'am," he asked gently, "are you okay?" The woman blinked several times before trying to focus on his face. I think I missed," she whispered, her words dissolving into a weary smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I don't even know what I missed anymore." Ethan noticed there were no shopping bags, no friends nearby, and no sign that anyone was coming back for her. Only a small leather purse rested beside her, untouched despite the steady rain. "Do you have someone I can call?" he asked. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a phone with a nearly dead screen, and frowned at the unfamiliar blur of names before shaking her head. Everyone thinks I'm somewhere else tonight." She tried to stand, but her knees gave way almost immediately. Ethan caught her elbow just enough to steady her without pulling her closer than necessary. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're safe." For a long moment, the only sound between them was the soft rhythm of rain tapping against the bus shelter roof and distant tires humming along the interstate. Ethan looked up at the dark sky, then at the shivering stranger whose shoulders trembled against the cold. He knew exactly what people might assume if they saw him helping her. He knew the risk of being misunderstood, but he also knew he could not leave another human being alone on a freezing sidewalk simply because doing the right thing was inconvenient. Taking a slow breath, he picked up her abandoned shoe, opened the passenger door of his aging truck, and made a quiet decision that would change far more than either of them could possibly imagine. Ethan kept the heater running as the old pickup rolled through quiet neighborhoods where porch lights glowed softly behind curtains already drawn for the night. The woman sat quietly in the passenger seat with her head resting against the window, watching raindrops race each other across the glass as if she were trying to remember where she belonged. Every few minutes, she whispered something too faint to understand before drifting back into exhausted silence. Ethan glanced at the dashboard clock. It was almost 10:30. Lily would still be awake. She always waited for him on Friday nights, refusing to fall asleep until she heard the familiar rumble of his truck pulling into the driveway. He turned onto Maple Street, where modest homes lined both sides of the road beneath towering oak trees that had begun shedding their last golden leaves. His small white house stood near the end of the block with a single porch light glowing warmly against the darkness. Before opening the passenger door, Ethan paused for a moment. He reminded himself that every choice carried responsibility, especially with an 8-year-old daughter inside. He gently knocked on the front door first instead of using his key. Almost instantly, the door swung open. Lily stood there wearing oversized pajamas covered with tiny blue stars, hugging her favorite stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her sleepy smile appeared the moment she saw her father. "You are late," she said softly. "I know," Ethan answered with an apologetic smile. "I had to help someone tonight." Lily looked past him toward the truck. Her curious green eyes landed on the woman sitting quietly inside. Instead of asking questions, she simply nodded with a kindness that seemed far older than her years. "Does she need help?" she whispered. Ethan smiled. "I think she does." Together they helped the young woman inside, giving her space and speaking gently whenever she seemed confused. The warmth of the house wrapped around them like a welcome after the cold rain. The smell of tomato soup still lingered from dinner, mixing with cinnamon from the candle Lily had insisted on lighting after finishing her homework. The stranger looked around the little living room with quiet surprise. Family photographs covered one wall. Handmade drawings decorated the refrigerator. Nothing matched perfectly, yet everything felt cared for. Lily disappeared into her bedroom before returning with a folded blanket. "This one is soft," she said, offering it with both hands. The woman accepted it slowly, her eyes filling with quiet emotion she could not explain. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan heated a mug of herbal tea while Lily placed crackers on a small plate beside it. Nobody rushed her. Nobody demanded answers. They simply allowed the silence to become gentle instead of uncomfortable. After a few careful sips, the woman finally looked at Ethan with clearer eyes. "I am so sorry," she said. "I do not even know how I ended up here." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You do not have to explain anything tonight. You only need to rest." She stared at him as though those simple words belonged to a world she had almost forgotten existed. "Most people would have walked away," she said quietly. Ethan gave a tired smile. "Maybe, but I hope someone would stop if it were my daughter sitting alone in the rain one day." The room became still. Even the old clock above the fireplace seemed to tick more softly. The woman lowered her eyes, holding the warm mug between trembling hands. For the first time that evening, she did not look like someone escaping from something. She looked like someone remembering what kindness felt like. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the kitchen curtains, carrying with it the quiet promise that every difficult night eventually surrendered to a new day. Ethan was already packing Lily's lunch when he heard careful footsteps behind him. The young woman stood in the hallway wearing one of Lily's oversized sweatshirts, her blonde hair neatly brushed back, her expression calmer than it had been only a few hours before. She looked around the modest kitchen once more, taking in the chipped coffee mug beside the toaster, the handwritten grocery list taped to the refrigerator, and the laughter between father and daughter that filled the room without effort. "Good morning," she said softly. Ethan looked up and smiled. "Feeling better?" She nodded. "Much better. I think I finally remember enough to apologize properly." Lily slid a plate of buttered toast toward her. "Daddy says breakfast always helps people think better." The woman laughed quietly, a genuine laugh this time, warm enough to brighten the little kitchen. "Then your daddy is probably right." They shared breakfast together without awkward questions. Ethan never asked why she had been alone or where she had been before the rain. Instead, they talked about simple things. Lily explained how her third-grade class was growing tomatoes in paper cups. Ethan complained playfully about his pickup truck making strange noises whenever the weather turned cold. The woman listened more than she spoke, as though every ordinary conversation felt unexpectedly precious. When breakfast ended, she finally reached inside her designer handbag, now dry from the night before, and found a slim leather wallet. She sighed with visible relief before pulling out a driver's license and several business cards. Ethan instinctively looked away, giving her privacy she had not even requested. She noticed. Most people would have tried to read every detail. He did not. "My name is Charlotte," she said quietly. "Charlotte Bennett." Ethan extended his hand with the same calm respect he had shown from the beginning. "Nice to officially meet you. I am Ethan Brooks." Their handshake lasted only a moment, yet something about it felt strangely significant. Charlotte opened her wallet again and reached for several $100 bills. Ethan gently raised his hand before she could offer them. "Please," she said, "at least let me repay you for everything." Ethan smiled politely and shook his head. "You do not owe us anything." Lily needed another person to remind her that kindness still exists. "I think you helped with that more than you realize." Charlotte looked toward Lily, who was carefully feeding crumbs of toast to a pair of sparrows outside the kitchen window. Her eyes softened. "Your daughter is remarkable." Ethan answered with quiet pride. She learned from someone much better than me. Charlotte sensed the sadness hidden beneath those words, but chose not to ask. Some stories deserve time before they were spoken aloud. A rideshare arrived 10 minutes later. As Charlotte stood on the front porch preparing to leave, she turned back one final time. The little white house looked almost ordinary beneath the clear Indiana sky, yet somehow it felt richer than the glass towers she had spent most of her adult life inside. She folded a small piece of paper and placed it carefully beside the flower pot near the front door before stepping into the waiting car. Ethan never noticed it. He was too busy helping Lily zip her backpack before school. The sedan disappeared around the corner, carrying Charlotte back toward a world of polished boardrooms, expensive suits, and expectations that never seemed to end. She watched the house grow smaller through the rear window until it vanished completely. Then she whispered almost to herself, "I hope our paths cross again." Neither of them knew that less than 48 hours later they would stand only a few feet apart beneath the bright lights of a corporate auditorium, and the quiet kindness of one rainy night would suddenly become impossible for either of them to forget. Monday mornings always carried their own kind of tension inside Bennett Logistics headquarters, but this one felt different. Employees filled the glass atrium earlier than usual, straightening ties, smoothing jackets, and whispering about the arrival of the company's new chief executive officer. Rumors had traveled faster than official announcements. Some said the new leadership would eliminate entire departments. Others insisted promotions would depend on impossible standards. Ethan Brooks ignored nearly all of it. He adjusted his employee badge, exchanged a warm greeting with the security guard, and headed toward the maintenance office carrying his worn toolbox. He had learned years ago that worrying about tomorrow never repaired anything that was broken today. As he walked through the polished corridors, he stopped to help an elderly receptionist lift a heavy box of printer paper onto a supply cart. "Thank you, Ethan," she said with a grateful smile. "You always seem to appear at the right moment." He chuckled softly. "That is because broken things have excellent timing." A few nearby co-workers smiled before returning to their conversations about the incoming executives. At precisely 9 o'clock, every employee gathered inside the corporate auditorium. Bright ceiling lights reflected against polished wood panels, while two enormous display screens glowed with the company logo. The atmosphere felt formal, almost ceremonial. Ethan found a seat near the back beside several maintenance technicians who quietly joked about hoping the new leadership appreciated functioning air conditioners more than spreadsheets. Then the room became silent. Richard Bennett stepped onto the stage with the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades leading organizations through change. His silver hair and measured voice immediately commanded respect without demanding it. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for Bennett Logistics. Growth begins with people who believe in serving others before themselves." Ethan listened politely while glancing through the printed maintenance schedule folded inside his notebook. Richard smiled toward the audience before continuing. "There is one more person I would like you to meet. She will be joining our executive leadership team and working closely with every department over the coming months." The side doors opened quietly. A woman stepped onto the stage wearing a tailored navy business suit, her blonde hair carefully arranged, every movement composed and confident. Ethan looked up absent-mindedly. Then time seemed to stop. Charlotte Bennett froze almost imperceptibly the moment her eyes found him near the back row. For the briefest second, the polished executive disappeared, replaced by the exhausted woman who had sat quietly at his kitchen table holding a warm mug of tea only 2 mornings earlier. Ethan blinked once, uncertain whether he was imagining what he was seeing. Charlotte recovered first. Her expression remained professional, though a faint softness briefly crossed her eyes before disappearing behind practiced composure. "Thank you, Father," she said into the microphone with steady confidence. "I look forward to learning from every team in this company." No one else noticed the silent exchange passing between them. To everyone in the auditorium, it was simply another executive introduction. But Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken with quiet disbelief. Charlotte never acknowledged that they had already met. She never mentioned the rainy night, the little white house, or the breakfast shared with Lily. She simply continued speaking about teamwork, accountability, and respect as though they were complete strangers. Yet as the applause filled the room and employees lined up afterward to introduce themselves, Charlotte's eyes drifted toward Ethan one more time. It lasted only a heartbeat, barely long enough for anyone else to notice. But in that silent glance lived gratitude, embarrassment, unfinished questions, and the unmistakable feeling that the story between them had only just begun. The rest of Monday passed with the familiar rhythm of humming machinery, rolling carts, and the steady buzz of warehouse operations, yet something invisible had changed beneath the surface. Ethan returned to replacing faulty light fixtures and inspecting conveyor sensors just as he always did, refusing to let a surprising coincidence distract him from the work that put food on Lily's table. He convinced himself that whatever had happened over the weekend belonged in the past. Charlotte had made her choice to keep their meeting private, and he intended to respect it. Across the building, however, Charlotte found concentration almost impossible. Every meeting blurred together as department heads presented budgets, efficiency reports, and expansion plans. She listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and took detailed notes. Yet every so often her thoughts drifted back to the little white house on Maple Street. She remembered Lily proudly serving toast on a mismatched plate. She remembered Ethan quietly refusing money without a trace of pride. Most of all, she remembered how peaceful that tiny kitchen had felt compared to the polished executive conference room where she now sat surrounded by expensive suits and carefully rehearsed conversations. During lunch, she stepped onto an overlooking balcony with a cup of coffee, hoping the cool October breeze would clear her mind. Below, employees crossed the courtyard between buildings. Her eyes naturally found Ethan helping a delivery driver move several heavy supply boxes onto a loading cart. No cameras were nearby. No executives were watching. No promotion could possibly come from the simple act. He helped because someone needed help. Charlotte smiled to herself before quickly looking away, almost embarrassed by how easily she had begun searching for him in every crowd. Unfortunately, not everyone missed those small moments. Gregory Sloan, the operations manager responsible for several maintenance teams, noticed Charlotte's attention almost immediately. Gregory had built his career by reading office politics long before they became obvious. Ambitious, polished, and quietly calculating, he believed every interaction inside a corporation carried hidden motives. By late afternoon, he casually approached two supervisors near the break room. "Interesting," he remarked while stirring sugar into his coffee. "The new executive seems unusually familiar with one of our maintenance technicians." One supervisor shrugged. "Probably just coincidence." Gregory smiled without warmth. "Coincidences have a funny way of becoming promotions around here." The comment spread through casual conversations faster than anyone expected. By the end of the day, whispers drifted through hallways and maintenance workshops. Someone claimed Ethan had spoken privately with Charlotte before the executive meeting. Someone else insisted he must have known the Bennett family long before joining the company. Another employee joked that changing departments might be the smartest career move if you happened to have powerful friends. Ethan remained completely unaware until his longtime co-worker Marcus leaned against a workbench while they organized replacement parts. "You hearing what people are saying?" Marcus asked quietly. Ethan looked up with genuine confusion. "Should I be?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "Some folks think you already knew Miss Bennett before she came here." Ethan smiled faintly and returned a wrench to its drawer. "People can think whatever they want." "You are not going to explain?" Marcus asked. Ethan closed the toolbox with a gentle click. Not every good deed needs an audience, and not every misunderstanding deserves an argument. Marcus studied his friend for a long moment before nodding with quiet respect. Across the executive floor, Charlotte stood alone beside her office window watching the maintenance crew leave for the evening. She saw Ethan walking toward the employee parking lot carrying the same worn toolbox he had carried that morning. He never looked toward the executive offices. He never tried to approach her. He never attempted to benefit from the secret they shared. And in that silent walk across the fading autumn sunlight, Charlotte realized she had met something rarer than success, rarer than influence, and infinitely harder to find. She had met a man whose character remained exactly the same whether anyone was watching or not. By Wednesday morning, the rumors had grown louder than the hum of the conveyor belts. Ethan noticed the lingering glances, the conversations that paused whenever he entered a room, and the polite smiles that disappeared the moment he walked away. None of it changed the way he greeted people or completed his work. He replaced damaged ceiling panels, repaired a loading dock sensor before sunrise, and stopped to help a young employee whose pallet jack had stopped working in the middle of the warehouse. "You always make it look easy," the young man said gratefully. Ethan smiled as he tightened the final bolt. "Machines are simple. People are the complicated part." Meanwhile, Charlotte sat quietly in her office, staring at the small folded note she had left beside Ethan's flower pot on the morning she departed his home. She wondered if he had ever found it. The thought lingered only a moment before another question replaced it. Why had he never contacted her? Most people would have searched her name the moment they found her identification. Many would have expected gratitude, favors, or introductions. Ethan had done none of those things. The silence itself became the answer she could not ignore. Determined to understand more, Charlotte quietly asked the company's security director for access to the incident reports from the previous Saturday night. She explained that she had misplaced personal belongings during a private evening and wanted to retrace her movements. Within an hour, she sat alone reviewing security footage from nearby businesses and public cameras that legally covered the surrounding streets. There she was, leaving a charity fundraising dinner after receiving difficult personal news. She watched herself wandering through the rain, clearly exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed. Minutes later, another camera showed Ethan approaching the bus stop. He kept several respectful feet between them while speaking. He offered his jacket only after she began shivering. Another camera captured him helping her into his old pickup without rushing, without touching her except to steady her as she nearly lost her balance. Charlotte continued watching in complete silence. The next recording showed the truck stopping at a small pharmacy. Ethan stepped inside alone and returned carrying bottled water and headache medicine before driving home. The receipt time matched the unopened medicine she later discovered tucked neatly inside her handbag. He had even paid for it himself. Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment. Every recording erased another excuse she had unconsciously created to explain away his kindness. There had been no hidden motive, no performance, no audience. Just quiet decency offered to someone he believed would remain a stranger forever. That afternoon, she requested one more file from Human Resources. Ethan Brooks. Employment history. Performance evaluations. Attendance records. The folder revealed 10 years of nearly perfect attendance, exceptional performance reviews, and dozens of handwritten thank you notes from coworkers across multiple departments. One note from an elderly receptionist simply read, "He never lets anyone carry a burden alone if he can help." Another came from a warehouse associate whose wife had undergone surgery. Ethan donated vacation days without telling anyone. Charlotte slowly closed the folder, her throat tightening with unexpected emotion. At that same moment, Ethan was kneeling beside a malfunctioning conveyor motor, wiping grease from his hands while quietly humming a song Lily liked to sing on the drive to school. He had no idea that every quiet choice he had made over the years was slowly revealing the kind of man he truly was. High above the warehouse floor, Charlotte looked through the observation window and found him again. For the first time since joining the company, she no longer saw a maintenance technician in a worn work shirt. She saw the rarest kind of leader, the one who had never needed a title to serve other people with dignity. The following morning arrived wrapped in a crisp October breeze, and with it came an unexpected announcement that echoed through every department. Richard Bennett would spend the day visiting each operational division personally instead of remaining inside the executive offices. Managers rushed to prepare spotless workstations, polished presentations, and carefully rehearsed explanations for every performance chart. Gregory Sloan welcomed the opportunity more than anyone. He believed visibility created advantage, and advantage created promotions. Ethan, meanwhile, simply checked the maintenance schedule taped inside his toolbox and headed toward the distribution floor, where one of the automated sorting systems had begun making an unusual clicking sound before sunrise. To him, a machine that needed attention mattered more than impressing executives. Shortly after 10 o'clock, Richard and Charlotte entered the warehouse accompanied by several department leaders. Employees greeted them respectfully before returning to work. Richard observed far more than he spoke. He noticed who interrupted others, who accepted credit too quickly, and who quietly solved problems without expecting applause. Charlotte remained beside her father, although every few moments her attention drifted toward Ethan working several aisles away. Gregory noticed that as well. Eager to shape the narrative before anyone else could, he stepped closer to Richard with a confident smile. "Mr. Bennett, you may hear stories about Mr. Brooks," he said casually. "He is a capable technician, although lately he seems to enjoy attracting executive attention." Charlotte immediately turned toward Gregory, surprised by the quiet accusation hidden beneath his pleasant tone. Before she could respond, Richard simply nodded without revealing a single thought. "Thank you," he answered calmly. "I prefer forming my own conclusions." Gregory smiled politely, believing he had planted the seed he wanted. Minutes later, a warning indicator flashed above one section of the conveyor network. Several packages slowed unexpectedly as employees gathered with concerned expressions. Ethan walked over without urgency or panic. He listened to the rhythm of the motor for only a few seconds. Friday afternoon settled over Bennett Logistics with the steady rhythm of forklifts, conveyor belts, and the quiet determination of hundreds of employees finishing another demanding week. Sunlight streamed through the warehouse skylights, painting long golden lines across polished concrete floors, while the scent of fresh lumber and cardboard drifted through the air. Ethan Brooks was replacing a worn safety sensor near one of the primary sorting lines when every conveyor in the building slowed to an unexpected stop. A warning tone echoed overhead, followed by the calm voice of the operations system announcing a network synchronization failure. Conversations paused. Supervisors checked tablets. Drivers waiting at the loading docks exchanged uncertain looks as packages began stacking farther down the line. Gregory Sloan hurried across the floor, issuing rapid instructions that only seemed to create more confusion. One team restarted equipment while another powered sections down, causing delays to spread through multiple departments. Richard Bennett and Charlotte arrived moments later after hearing reports that the afternoon shipping schedule was falling behind. Rather than raising his voice, Richard quietly observed how people reacted under pressure. Some searched for excuses. Others searched for someone to blame. Ethan simply opened the nearest control panel and listened. He watched indicator lights flash in sequence, then followed the sound of one relay clicking half a second later than the others. He walked several yards to another cabinet, compared the timing again, and smiled faintly. "Please leave everything exactly as it is," he said calmly to the nearby supervisor. "Nothing is broken. The communication loop is waiting for one delayed confirmation signal." The supervisor nodded immediately. Ethan adjusted a loose communication connector that had gradually shifted from vibration over many months. He tightened two retaining screws, reset a single control module, and stepped back. Seconds later, the conveyors awakened in perfect sequence. Packages began moving smoothly once again. The warning lights disappeared. Employees released quiet sighs of relief before returning to work. A few people started clapping, but Ethan gently waved them back toward their stations. "We have deliveries depending on us," he said with an easy smile. "Let us finish what we started." Richard watched the entire scene without interruption. What impressed him even more than the repair was what followed. Ethan stopped to thank the young technician who had brought him the correct tool. He complimented another employee for quickly securing the area. He made certain everyone else received credit before picking up his own toolbox. There was no celebration, no speech, and no attempt to stand in the spotlight. Charlotte felt her heart grow unexpectedly warm as she recognized the same quiet humility that had welcomed a frightened stranger into a modest home only days before. Richard turned toward Gregory, whose confident expression had quietly faded. "Interesting," Richard said in an even voice. "Leadership often appears where no title exists." Gregory lowered his eyes without replying. Before leaving the warehouse, Richard addressed the employees gathered nearby. "Thank you all for your professionalism today," he said. "Moments like this remind us that great companies are built by people who solve problems together." Then he looked directly at Ethan. "Mr. Brooks, if your schedule allows, I would appreciate a few minutes of your time in my office before the day ends." The warehouse grew remarkably still. Ethan nodded respectfully, unaware that the conversation waiting behind the executive office doors would finally bring the truth of one rainy night into the light, where it could no longer remain a secret. The executive office overlooked the entire distribution campus, where hundreds of employees continued their work beneath the warm glow of the late afternoon sun. Ethan stood quietly near the doorway, his weathered toolbox resting beside his boots, while Richard Bennett closed the conference room door with calm deliberation. Charlotte was already there, standing near the window with an expression that carried equal parts gratitude and nervous anticipation. For several moments, no one spoke. The silence felt respectful rather than uncomfortable. Richard finally stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "before we discuss business, there is something far more important that deserves to be acknowledged." Ethan waited patiently. Richard continued, "Earlier this week, my daughter told me about a rainy Saturday night. She also showed me the security recordings from that evening. I watched every minute." Ethan lowered his eyes modestly. "I only did what I hoped someone would do for my own daughter." Richard nodded slowly. "That is exactly why this conversation matters." Charlotte stepped closer, her voice quiet but steady. "I owe you an apology. I never thanked you properly. I was embarrassed when we met again at work, and I convinced myself that staying silent would protect everyone. Instead, my silence allowed rumors to grow around someone who never deserved them." Ethan offered a reassuring smile. "You were not responsible for what other people chose to imagine." Richard reached for a small folder resting on the conference table. "Character cannot be measured by titles or salaries," he said. "It is revealed by the choices people make when they believe no one will ever know." He explained that he had spent the past several days reviewing Ethan's employment history, speaking with coworkers, and learning about the countless quiet acts of kindness that had never appeared on performance reports. Every story pointed toward the same truth. Ethan served people because it was simply who he was. Richard extended his hand. "I would like to offer you a new position as Facilities Operations Coordinator. The promotion comes with better hours, additional support, and enough flexibility to spend more evenings with Lily." Ethan looked surprised. "Sir, I have never asked for anything beyond the chance to do honest work." Richard smiled warmly. "That is precisely why you have earned this opportunity." News of the promotion quietly spread through the building before the workday ended. Many employees congratulated Ethan with sincere respect. Gregory Sloan approached as well, his confidence replaced by humility. "I judged you unfairly," he admitted. "I am sorry." Ethan shook his hand without hesitation. "We all have second chances." 2 days later, Charlotte drove once again down Maple Street, this time beneath clear blue skies instead of falling rain. She carried no expensive gifts, only a homemade apple pie prepared from her late mother's recipe. Lily opened the front door before Charlotte even reached the porch. "You came back," she said with a bright smile. Charlotte laughed softly. "I hoped that was all right." Lily answered by wrapping her in a cheerful hug. Inside the little white house, the familiar scent of tomato soup and fresh bread filled the kitchen once again. They shared dinner around the same modest table where strangers had first become friends. As evening settled outside, warm lights spilled through the windows onto the quiet neighborhood. No grand speeches were needed. No miracle arrived in a line of luxury cars. There was only gratitude, forgiveness, gentle laughter, and 3 people discovering that family sometimes begins with one simple act of kindness offered on a rainy night without expecting anything in return. And in a world that often celebrates the loudest voices, it was quiet dignity that changed every heart.